Welcome to the third part of my 1960s transformation dress series. Today I'm going to show you how to make a hoop skirt in 3 different sizes that will cover all your mid-Victorian needs. The first question you may have is how big should your hoop skirt be? So this narrow crinoline is more suitable for day wear. It's good in confined areas, where you don't have a lot of space, and if you want to try wearing hoop skirts for the first time. This regular one could be used for a day dress, but also for more formal attire, like a ball gown. I wore it a lot with different kinds of dresses, and it's my favorite, because it's easy to move around, it gives you a nice shape, and it's not too large to be troublesome. And there is also this one, for when you just want to go a bit extra. I would only use it for a ball gown or evening dress. There is also this unspoken rule that your hoop circumference should be no more than 60 to 80% of your height multiplied by pi. I made this little tool so you can calculate it for yourself. The link would be in the description below. So now that you figure out the size of your hoop skirt, let's start working on the pattern. You can find it in my Etsy shop, which should be linked in the description. This time I added A0 paper size, so you can print it at a copy shop. Cut the paper pieces out and let's start cutting the panels. I'm using extra wide fabric, that's 87 inches or 220 centimeters wide. But you can use standard width fabric. I calculated how much you would need for most common width. You can find it in the listing description. There are 3 main pieces, front, side and back, and you need to cut 2 pieces for each of them. Trace the patterns on your fabric. Here I'm using washers as pattern weights, so the pattern doesn't shift. And carefully cut both layers out. Write pattern names on each panel and mark center front and center back. Now it's time to trace boning channels. I'm going to show you 3 different methods on a small scale so you can pick the one you like. Let's start with the quickest method. You will need a tracing wheel and carbon paper. Place the folded carbon paper between 2 pattern pieces. Put the paper pattern on top and roll your tracing wheel along the boning channels. Always do a little test, because you don't want to finish tracing only to find out that you didn't press hard enough. After you're done with tracing, you should have 2 mirrored pattern pieces. The second method requires you to fold the pattern along the channels and place it over the pattern piece to transfer the markings. Repeat it for the other piece, folding the pattern to the opposite side. And the last method. Poke a hole every couple of inches along the boning channels. Mark the points through the pattern and then connect the dots together. Repeat it for the other pieces, and now let's cut the bum pad. Fold the fabric in half 2 times, then place the pattern on fold, trace it and cut it out. You should have 2 crescent-looking shapes. And the last part is a waistband. Cut a rectangle that's 4 inches or 10 centimeters wide. For length, take your waist measurement and add 1¼ inch or 3 centimeters to it. Take note that there is going to be a drawstring at the waist that allows you to adjust the waistband. And now you finally get to sew. Let's start with the center back seam. Pin the back panels right sides together, matching the boning channels, and sew. Now let's add the side panels. Again, pin right sides together, match and sew. And do the same with the front panels, but don't close the center front seam for now. Now let's make flat felt seams. You see, if you just press the seam open and stitch the boning channel over it, then when you're going to insert the hoop stitch into the channel, it could get stuck in the seam allowance. So instead we should make it as flat as possible. Start by pressing all of the seams you just stitch open. Then trim one of the seam allowances to half its width. Press the larger seam allowance in half so it almost meets the original seam. Then fold the whole seam over on itself to the other side so that the raw edge is now hidden, and press again. Now return to the machine and top stitch as close to the folded edge as possible. Try not to rush and not to catch the fabric as you go, because there is a lot of it. If you don't want to bother with flat felt seams, you can just press the seams open and stitch the seam allowance to the hoop skirt using a zigzag stitch. It would achieve the same result, just wouldn't look as nice. Now let's move to the center front. Stitch the front pieces right sides together, but leave the opening at the top. Clip the seam allowance where it shows on the pattern. Make another flat felt seam at the center front. Press the seam open, cut one seam allowance, and press another to the center. Now let's move to the top opening. Fold raw edges over by 5/8 of an inch or 50 mm and press. Then open the press seam allowance and tuck the raw edge underneath into that fold and press again. Top stitch the center front seam and top stitch the front opening using a seam allowance just a bit smaller than the fold. Now that the opening looks nice and clean, let's start working on the hoop skirt channels. I recommend using either bias or twill tape. Both of them have some stretch, so they will curve really nicely as boning channels. Make a test piece before starting working on a hoop skirt. The hoop stitch should move easily across the channel. It would be better if the channel is too big than too tight. Believe me, I'm writing this script right now with blisters on my fingers, because the twill tape I used was just a bit too narrow. So, when you are happy with your test piece, let's start adding boning channels to the hoop skirt. First, we start with the half hoop at the top. It should begin a bit lower than the start of the line, so it crosses the first hoop marking. Line it up with the line you marked and top stitch it in place, starting with the top edge. Then top stitch the bottom edge, but leave a small opening at the end of the channel. Now make a mark 1 inch away from center back seam for each channel. You will use them as a guide for where to start and finish the channel. Fold the end of the tape inward so it forms a clean edge. Line it up with the first hoop marking and stitch it in place. It should go over the half hoop channel, closing it from both sides. When you get closer to the end, again fold the end of the tape to the inside and stitch over it. You can top stitch the bottom edge right now, but I prefer to stitch all of the channels in place and then sew the other edge. So I move to the second channel, then to third, and go all the way down to the bottom one. It does take a lot of time, usually about an hour or so, and it's a pretty tedious work, so I usually put my headphones on and just listen to audiobooks or podcasts while I top stitch the channels. And this is why this video is sponsored by Audible. No, I'm joking. I was actually listening to a class on Skillshare, but I'm not sponsored by them either. Thankfully, the bottom edge of the tapes was done much faster, just because you don't have to line up the tapes to the hoop markings. So, after you stop stitch the channels, it's time to hem the hoop skirt and to make the last boning channel at the same time. Start by turning the hoop skirt right side out. If you're using a twill tape, you may need a wider one, but with bias tape, you should be fine. Line up the edge of the tape with the center back edge right sides together. Fold the edge over at the start and stitch the tape to the hem edge. If you're using bias tape, unfold one side and sew along the fold of the tape. When you reach the starting point again, overlap the tape by ½ inch and trim. Now flip the tape up to the wrong side and press. And now you just have to sew down the other edge of the tape, but leave 2-inch opening at the center back. Now the only thing that needs to be done is the waistband. Mark 5/8 of an inch or 15 mm from each of the edges to indicate the seam allowance, and mark the half and quarter points. They are going to be your back and side marks. Fold it in half lengthwise and press. Mark the seam allowance on the right side of the waistband with the ruler, and place a cord that's going to become 2 button loops, and baste each of them in place so they don't shift. This is how it's going to look after the waistband is finished. Make a hole at each end of the waistband. We are going to use them for drawstring. Use a buttonhole stitch to finish edges and make them stronger. Now we are going back to the hoop skirt. Gather the top edge using 2 gathering threads. Set your sewing machine to a long straight stitch and stitch 2 lines. Then grab both bobbin threads on one side and pull to slide the fabric along the threads. Pin the center back to the center of the waistband. Then pin the seams between front and side panel to the side marks on the waistband. And finally pin the center front to the waistband seam allowance marks. Make sure that your gathers look like they are evenly spaced, and pin everything in place. Be careful to only catch one side of the waistband. Stitch both pieces together between 2 gathering threads and remove them afterwards. You may want to trim the seam allowance to reduce the bulk at the waist. Now flip the edge of the waistband to meet the waist seam and fold seam allowance like this. Sew the ends of the waistband, then trim seam allowance, clip the corner and repeat for the other side. Then flip the waistband right side out. Fold the raw edge up towards the inside of the waistband, so that it's hidden inside, and press. After that, feed the drawstring through the waistband. Attach the inner side of the waistband to the hoop skirt. I use small whip stitches for that. But be careful that your stitches don't show through on the right side. Now mark the dots through the button loops and sew the buttons in place. I also tied knots at the end of the drawstring to prevent them from slipping into the waistband. And now the last step, adding hoop steel or hoop wire. I use 6 mm hoop wire that I order in bulk. I measure it with a measuring tape. You can find the measurement for each hoop in the instruction. mark each hoop and cut it with cable cutters. Now turn your hoop skirt wrong side out and put it on a dress form. You can do it without a dress form, it's just more convenient if the skirt is hanging in place. Start by sliding the top hoop at the center back opening. Take your time with it, so you don't rush and poke a hole through the channels. Continue pushing the hoop wire through the channel until it comes out at the end. There are a few ways you can use to connect the ends together. The most accessible one is duct tape. Just tape the ends together and you're good. The second one is to use silicone tubing. It's easy to put on and to take off, so the hoops could be quickly unfastened and rolled up in a suitcase or packaged for shipping. And there is also hoop connectors. I've never used them because I couldn't find them here, but they seem like a nice option. And now continue this process until you have placed all of your hoops. If you want to make the hoops a bit smaller, just pull the hoop wire until you are happy with the result, and then cut the extra wire. The last step is to insert the half hoop into its channel. To stop sharp edges from poking through the fabric, you can use spiral bond tips or just tape it with duct tape. After you inserted it in place, close the opening with small whip stitches. And now it's time to put your hoop skirt on. But what is it? Why is it tipping forward so much? It seems that you need something to support the back of the hoop skirt. Remember that bum part you started to make a while ago? It's time to put it together. Take two tapes that are long enough to tie around your waist and place them over the corners of the part. The tapes will be on the outside when the bum part is finished. Now place the other part piece over it and pin. Make sure that the tapes wouldn't get caught in stitching. Now sew all around the edge, leaving an opening in the center so you can stuff your part through it. Clip inward curves and notch outward curves, or you can just use pinking shears. Turn the part inside out. Start with small amounts of stuffing, pushing it into the corners. Continue stuffing until you reach the center. And sew up the opening by hand with whip stitches. I love the shape I was able to achieve with these hoop skirts. I've been working on improving it for the last 3 years, and I can finally say that I'm happy with it. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to make a petticoat for these hoop skirts. But for now, I think that's all for today. Thank you for staying with me till the very end, and I'll see you when I see you.